Hey there, Paul. How are you, man? It's good to hear your voice. Thank you for the questions and the messages. If you're not Paul Killeen and you're here watching this video, Paul is a friend of mine. He's a tracer from Ireland, and he has a bunch of questions about some of the definitions, some of the differences, some of the foundings of parkour and freerunning and Art Du Deplacement, and he asked me to shed light from my experience on it, and I'm happy to do so. I told him, Paul, if I'm going to make a video and answer these questions, I'm going to just put it on YouTube so everyone can hear the perspective I have, because I have a unique perspective. For your information, Paul, and for anyone else, by the way, the questions are in the description. What gives me the credibility to talk about these things is the time I spent with David. So in 2011, I moved to France to work directly with David on various projects, and we spent the next 3 years being very close friends. I became integrated into his family, into his inner circle in life. I probably spend maybe 8 hours a day with David, one-on-one, maybe 4 days a week. Sometimes we'd spend more time together, sometimes I'd spend the night at his house. Like if I fell asleep watching a movie or something at his house. Later in our relationship, I became really close with his family, with his mother. Whenever I'd go to Lease, I would stay at his mom's house, and that's where I'd stay and help her buy groceries, and we'd go grocery shopping. I became close with his sister, with his wife. So there's not any contemporary tracer and not any American that I've ever heard of that ever was as close to as David as I was, and ever became as good of friends to David as I was. And so that gave me amazing access to him on a personal level, to hear candidly his thoughts about people, to hear candidly his experiences in the past, to hear his stories about his father and about his friends and all the drama. I mean, believe me, I realized that I was in a situation that very few people have ever had or ever will have. And so I utilized that, and when I had a question about solving problems in the past or controversy or wanting to understand something about parkour or the Yamakasi or anything, I'd ask David directly and say, David, what's the deal here? What's your perspective? What's your story? In addition to that, because of the place I had, being a business manager for David, being his brand manager for a while, and just being a friendly, outgoing person, and living in Lease, I met so many people that were there at the beginning or there from the beginning, and was able to have extensive conversations with them. People like Jos, who was David's agent for a while. Of course, Guy Janaudet was David's agent before I got there and kind of became David's manager. People like Kazuma, close friends of him like Thibaut, Benoit, Joe, even Lissois, even tracers that were there that said, yeah, I remember seeing David when he was 15 years old doing wall flips with a cast on his arm. Like, that's the first time I saw David. That's a story from a friend of mine, Alex, who lives in Lease. That's the first time he ever saw David. So it's being around these people and hearing the stories and being able to fill in the gaps. Even people like Jan, I can't pronounce his name, Jan Hantura, I had tea with him one-on-one. So I've been able in my life, in the experience I've had, to have conversations, candid conversations, with a wide range of people with different perspectives, but were people that were there from the beginning. People that knew David when he was a teenager, people that worked and trained with David when he was in his prime, when he traveled to the States to try costumes on for being the Spider-Man stunt double. And of course, more than anything, I was there with David. Even one of my favorite stories ever, which nothing happened, but I was with David one time at his house, just me and him hanging out, and Sebastien Foucan showed up and knocked on the door. And he comes in, and then it's Sebastien and David and me, and Sebastien and David are talking, and what a special moment for me. Anyway, the point is I have an experience that, and a perspective, and I've had conversations that I don't know if anyone else in the parkour world or the world itself has ever had. The level of extensiveness of conversations with David, and also the variety of conversations about parkour and about the past, about life and perspectives, and also the conversations with other people in that same kind of circle of experience. So that's what gives me my authority to share and shed light on some of these issues. So with that said, I will try my best not to ramble, Paul, and I will try to give you succinct answers, and then also maybe a couple stories that help show you why I've arrived at my conclusions. You know, the reason I get to a conclusion is because I've spent years reading stuff and spending time with David and asking questions, and then it all summarizes in, this is the conclusion I have. Well, I'd have to talk to you for hours to tell you all the details of why certain conclusions were ruled out or why they don't make sense. I don't have time to do that on a video. I don't want to do that on a video. That's for like future times, for documentaries to figure out and for producers to put together succinctly. So I just want to give you the succinct answers and then maybe some simple stories as well to tell you about some things that show definitive leanings towards the conclusions I have. So your first question, and again, all the questions are down in the description. You sent me 2 main question paragraphs and then also 3 other questions in your 12-minute ramble to me, which was lovely, by the way. You ramble anytime to me, Paul. Anytime, dude. So I'll just try to be succinct. All right, question 1. Chau Belle always maintains that the original practitioners started together. But David says that he initially started alone and that slowly but surely people began to tag along, which is true. The simplest answer is to say that Chau Belle started after David and had nothing to do with David starting, and that David started and trained from the majority alone. Is that a good answer? Whatever. Just assume that David started alone. That's my answer. David started alone and Chau Belle doesn't know what he's talking about. I'll come back to that. If David started alone, how long did he spend training on his own before he started to train with others like Chau and Sebastien? And how far had he developed parkour before others joined in? Then these are questions become really convoluted because exact times and dates, it's hard to pinpoint them. I don't know them. And on top of that, even if you did know them, would it even matter? So what if the first time, here's a theoretical example, what if the first time David went out and did his parkours, what if Chau was with him, right? And then what if the next 250 times David went out, he went out alone, right? Because like a year passed or something, or 6 months passed. And then the next time that Chau went out, David was there too. Well, from Chau's experience, he's like, well, we always trained together. But from David's experience, the fact that Chau was there in the beginning means nothing, means zero, it means zilch. The first time I ever trained, the first time I ever did parkour, I went out with a roommate in college, right? To say he and I started together is completely ridiculous because I think he trained with me 1 or 2 more times, right? So it's this type of mentality, this type of idea. And this is where I'm coming back to my first statement. I think from Chau's perspective, he always trained with groups, or always trained with David. I haven't talked to him, but this is my speculation, coagulating information. So from his perspective, he can say, yeah, we were always together, always training. But from David's perspective, someone who trained a lot alone, that's completely ludicrous to say they were always together. It's absurd. David told me very explicitly, probably on multiple occasions even, that he would go out and train with the group, right? The group would be there, they trained for a couple hours, everyone would have fun or doing whatever they did. I don't know a lot about that. David didn't talk a ton about that. It didn't seem to be important to him in our personal conversations. But they would train for a couple hours. You can't refute that. That happened. Well, then everyone would go home, and David said once everybody went home, he would go back out and train again for another 3 or 4 hours alone. And I think that picture of that training shows how someone like Chau can say, oh yeah, we always trained together. This was a group thing. We developed this together. But David's like, no, I was on my own path. And I spent more time alone, more time processing, more time growing on that path than I ever spent with you guys. And it was never about you guys. You guys were like a tangent, random, like diversion, if you will, compared to my training and my focus. I think that story says a lot about probably what really happened. In addition to that, you have to ask, why did David become so good? Why did he become so much better than everybody else? Like, why is he iconic? Why is his movement still ahead of its time? Why will he go down in history? Why is he down in history as one of the greatest athletes of our generation, or the greatest athlete of our generation, compared to someone like Chau, who's, not so good? You think they were always trained together and they reached the same level? You think David had some proclivity to just be this amazing athlete? He's a skinny white boy. Look at his videos from when look at his photos of when he's doing track as a teenager. He's a skinny white boy, right? So how did he get so good? Well, because he didn't start together, and they didn't train together all the time. David was on his own path, tracing his own path. And these guys like Chau, and others came along. Now, of everybody involved, Sebastien, no doubt in my mind, Sebastien was there the most, and if anything, he was the most influential because he and David were such close friends. And they really, Joe's told me once that they really worked as kind of the perfect duo that really pushed each other in the ways that best friends do. And because of that, I think Sebastien really helped David grow as an individual and as a tracer. And the way best friends do. Does that mean Sebastien helped develop parkour? I wouldn't go that far. But we all take inspirations from different things in life. You know, I started the company Take Flight, but I haven't made every design in the history of Take Flight, or I didn't even design the website. There's things like that I haven't done, because that's what a business is. But are any of those people considered the founders or the developers of Take Flight? No. Like, they're just people that came along at certain times that I allowed to give inspiration, that I incorporated their ideas into the company. So it's the same idea here with someone like David, as he's training with people, and of course we take inspiration and ideas from each other. But are they a part of developing it? Absolutely not. So again, your question is like, how far had David developed parkour before the others joined in? I don't know, and I don't know if that has a simple answer to it. It's just very clear that he started before, that he trained harder, and that he was on a different type of path with a different type of focus and movement than a lot of those other guys. I mean, look how the Yamakasi Chau or Laurent or Jan, look how they move and look how David moves. It's not the same thing. Laurent is on this bench doing bench movement like twist on a bench, and David's jumping the BBC gap. Those are two complete, one's like a ballet, trying to make some artsy urban ballet, and another guy's like a warrior doing something no one's ever done before. So to even put them in the same category of athlete is completely absurd. It's completely absurd, much less to say they all started together. It's ridiculous. So I hope that sheds some light on that. Next question. Number 2. I've always read that they coined the term free running as an English translation for the word parkour in the Jump London doc. But clearly they're not describing parkour in the doc, maybe. And just recently I read on Parkour Gen that they actually coined it as a translation for ADD. Was Foucan, who was the star of Jump London, was he then describing ADD rather than parkour, or was he just describing his own new concept? And does that mean that free running and ADD are essentially the same thing? They're almost identical, in my mindset at least. Well, this is where things get confusing because there's disinformation. People have invested interest, and including ego and pride in certain ideas. And Parkour Generations has done a very large disservice to the parkour world in spawning certain ideas, and even worse, perpetuating those ideas about ADD. Here's how I see it. I see parkour as belonging to David. And what parkour is David. David has say and full reign in that, right? Free running belongs to Sebastien. And whatever Sebastien says, that's what free running is. And then ADD can belong to, I guess, Chau Belle or any of those Yamakasi guys who want to claim it, and they can say whatever that is. I see them as three very distinct things. I see parkour as David's way, as his training method, free running as Sebastien's way, and ADD as some urban training artsy movement that a couple French guys have done but nobody cares about. And that's how I view it. I'm going to be blunt about it. The problem is the definition of things. And these are where things kind of get complicated because I think that the clear answers don't do anybody justice. So for example, I believe, as you said, that free running was a term that came out of the Jump London documentary. But I believe it was a producer that recommended the term, so then incorporated it into the documentary. I have read a document, this was a long time ago, this was like in 2007. I read a document back then, 2006, 2007, I started parkour in 2006, where Foucan said that free running was not his way. That he said free running was a term that they chose to characterize or describe his movement, but it wasn't his. How's that for like a mind-blowing thing, right? At the same time, 2006, 2007, Parkour.com was live back then. It was run by Sebastien, and he credited himself as the co-founder of Parkour. So throw that into the mix of like what was what and who was what. It just shows you that there was a lot of like people finding their way, trying to make a brand, trying to play with the names. I think through that all, I think Fukan finally decided, okay, free running is my way. That is the term I'm going to adopt. And he's owned it. And I respect him for that, and that's why I say free running is Sebastian's, whatever he wants to say it is. And if he says free running is not mine, it's for everyone, and everyone can make it what they want, then I respect that too. I give the rights of free running to Sebastien. That's how I view it. It simplifies everything. Parkour, however, it was no doubt David's way and what he saw from the beginning. So coming back to your other stories, you asked, which I may touch on, you talked about Chau and William are David's cousins, and they knew Raymond. Here's the thing, Chau lived with Raymond. Raymond, I believe, I don't know whose house it was, maybe it was Chau's family's house, but Raymond lived in a tent in the backyard. This is according to David, if my memory serves me correct. And so Chau lived with David, and probably Chau lived with Raymond, and David did not live with Raymond. David lived with his mother. And Chau probably saw Raymond more than David. But I would bet you money, and this is what David said, so I mean, I believe this, that Raymond never, ever, ever talked to Chau about parkour. Never in his life. Raymond was that type of person, like very closed off, very warrior-esque. And even to his son David, he didn't have like, I think the charismatic or the caring, like fatherly love that we see as a picturesque in Hollywood. I think he was very gruff and very strong, and I can tell you stories about him, about he would sleep on his cot, according to David, at night with no covers on, and would wake up and there'd be snow on him because it snowed that night before. Like that type of level of psychological strength, and to be there, you just don't have the caringness for other people and for children. That said, Raymond, I heard, was very kind and was very generous, which is why he didn't have any money. But that's another story. And I'm reaching a little bit, so maybe delete that I said that. But that's my impression and interpretation of who Raymond was based on the stories I've heard from David, which I'm not telling you this time, except the ones I did. So here's a story David told me. He said he was inspired by his father, how strong his father was. And there's lots of stories that talk about how strong David was, or how strong Raymond was. Even as an old man, even at like 60, David said it was him and a friend trying to move like a washing machine in their house when they were like 20s, and ripped David at 20 and a friend trying to move a washing machine, and they couldn't move it. And Raymond, frustrated, comes over and in one push just moves the washing machine. So you have like this old man that's stronger than like really fit, strong young bucks. He is a legend, no doubt. And David knew it from the time he was a kid. So David said he'd go to his father and sit in his tent and say, "Papa, how did you become so strong?" And Raymond's answer was, "I did parkour. I did parkours." That's what Raymond did. And that inspired David. And then from there, he showed David movements, and David began to develop his way based on what his father showed him. This is important because this is the type of story that shows that David was always emulating his father, was always doing parkours like his father. So these other ideas that came in are these terms that were coined in a group effort when they trained and moved together. Like that was one thing, but I think in David's perspective and his training and his focus, that was very separate and ultimately unimportant to what he was doing. Because he was doing parkours, he was tracing after his father. So that's what parkour is. And then, again, the free running concept is interesting, kind of a term coined in the Jump London doc. And ADD, I don't know what the heck that is or where it's from. You said that Sebastien coined it. Sure. I don't give a flip. I don't give a flying flip about ADD. I really could not care less about it. It's this weird thing that nobody does and nobody cares about. It's like being quiet and bear crawling through the forest. Nobody cares. So maybe a couple people do. Bravo to you. But that to me has nothing to do, has zero to do with the parkour free running discussion, debate, or training. And I think the reason we talk about it, the only reason we talk about it, is because parkour generations came along with what's his first name? Edwards? I remember his first name. I want to call him John, but I don't think it's John. Crap, one of the founders of Parkour Generations. He came along with this great idea, and used to write for Urban Free Flow. Everyone was involved in Urban Free Flow back in the day. They separated with Stephen Vigru and started Parkour Generations. And I really think that in their zealousy to make a business, and their lack of information for other, like there was lack of information. You know, David wasn't around to share his story and didn't really care and things like that. I think they clumped all these ideas together and then wanted to have the credibility, we're working with the founders of this new sport, which they weren't. It's absurd, and to be blunt about it, they have no idea what they're talking about. So they're either lying or they have no idea what they're talking about. One of those two. Because Chau Belle did not found parkour. But in their zealousy for these, they lumped in ADD and freerunning and parkour, wanted to say they were all the same, and that Chau and the other Yamakasi guys were all involved in developing it. It's completely bogus. I wrote an article a couple years ago that said, saying parkour was founded by 9 is the dumbest thing of all time. And it is. Because if parkour was founded by 9 people, then it was founded by like 80 people. Over the time, we have 9 people that are credited of being with the Yamakasi, which isn't true, because David was never a part of the Yamakasi. I'll share that story in a second. But over the years of training, people were welcome to come and train with them. And many, many people did. You know, David became this, as he said it in multiple videos, like I was just training and people kept following me, right? People came, would train for a day or a week or a couple months, and they'd leave and come and go. Like tons of people, dozens of people over the years would come and train with these people, would come and train with David. So the fact that maybe 9 ended up there at the time that they made a video, you know, that they made their first newscast or something like that, and then that was labeled the Yamakasi, those guys were the ones that did it. Heck, if you're going to give credit to all of them and say they're all at the same level, which they clearly weren't, but if you're going to give them credit to that, then you got to give credit to everybody else that came and was part of it along the way. And no one's doing that. So let's be honest with what happened, and let's have a congruent, consistent, founded argument. To say parkour was founded by 9 people or ADD was founded by 9 people is ridiculous. You might as well say it was founded by 80 people, which I think we can all agree is ridiculous. Look at the parkour history videos, right? There's 5 of them. They're on YouTube, on David's old YouTube channel. They're now on parkour.com, on the Facebook page. And if you go and look at that, you'll see the level difference. David runs up the staircase, tacks off the wall, and jumps over the rail. It's like a legitimate 13-foot drop, I think, with how high he is. And he lands and rolls like it's nothing. And then you have these other guys that are like, kind of like Malik, I think, who now has like his own brand. He like goes through like the railing bars, it's complete crap. It's complete and utter crap. He's a kid trying to look cool, and David is this athlete that's soaring through the air, doing a jump I've still never seen anybody do. Like, to say these guys are all founders is the most ludicrous thing you can do. You have to be blind to the truth and be favoring certain ideas to push an agenda. It's the only way to arrive at that conclusion. So it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. What story was I going to tell you? I don't remember. You'll have to ask me again sometime. Last question. I'm going to go through the last things in your voice message you sent me, the 12-minute voice message you sent me. I wrote down notes, and I will sell them here. Number 1, when Seb coined the term ADD, was this meant as parkour, or was this meant as something separate? I don't know. You'll have to ask Seb. My guess is, again, David was in one mentality of what he was doing, and for him that was parkour's. That was the path of his father. That's what he was trying to find and trace and develop and grow through. And this other group thing was something different. I will say that of everyone I've talked to and of everyone I've analyzed, like psychologically, in the sense of being with them and seeing how they talk, how they are emotionally, their level of character, of integrity and truth and honesty and these types of things, of everybody, there's no one I respect more when they talk than Sebastien. Because Sebastien has shown the humility in his life, he's shown the character, he's shown objectivity, he's shown kindness, he's shown all these things. And so if you want to talk to somebody about what happened in the past, I think everyone's story is important because it's all someone's perspective, and we have to bring their perspectives together to understand and sort through what happened really. But if there's one person that I'd say talk to him and listen to him and trust him, I would say ask Sebastien, and he's going to know. So if anything I say is false, or if Sebastien says anything is false, it depends on what he says. If he tells me a story that David told me is false, then I'd be like, well, Sebastien, you probably don't know what you're talking about. But if he says anything else that I'm just like conjecturing about is false, then I would believe Sebastien. So, question number one, ask Sebastien. Number two, when did the Yamakasi all start getting involved? Where were they from the start, or did David develop parkour by himself? Again, I think I alluded to all this other stuff in some of my other stories and explanations. But that reminded me of my story. David was never a part of the Yamakasi. Never, ever, 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 for even a millisecond, he was never a part of the Yamakasi. So, I believe this is what happened. Chau Belle, David's brother, was like, this is amazing. You guys need to do some, do some stuff. So they did one performance for like the military, and there's some old photos of that, of them like hanging on a zip line with masks on and climbing towers and doing flips. They made some videos, Jeff filmed some videos, and somehow these views got to the media, and the media wanted to do a feature. So they all go to do this feature. Now we're on to a story that David told me. Because I asked David about this. I spent 3 years with David, like as a legitimate inner circle, best friend, brother. His mother calls me his second son, like that level of relationship. Believe me, I asked him all these questions because I wanted to know, just like you want to know, right? So they go to do like, I think this first newscast film thing, right? And oh, it's kind of fuzzy. It was something like the newscast wanted them to have a name, like wanted to call their group something. So I think maybe they got together a day before, or like the morning of the film, said, what are we going to call ourselves? And one of the guys was like, oh, let's call ourselves the Yamakasi. That was the name that someone thought of. So they're like, okay, I guess. So they went and do this film thing and called themselves the Yamakasi, I think. And then they come back, and David goes home. He's at his house thinking, and everyone comes over to his house like, oh my gosh, that was awesome. We're going to be on TV, blah, blah, blah. And David looks at them and says, guys, I'm done. Like, I'm done. I'm not a part of this. And David told me that that's the one time in his life that he feels like he betrayed what he set out to do. He betrayed like his father's legacy. Because for that moment, or that newscast, he said what he was doing wasn't parkour's, and he left the group. So maybe David was part of the quote-unquote Yamakasi for 8 hours or something, but he was never a part of it. He was a part of a group that was training, where he was the leader, where he was always the best, where people always were aspired to be as good as him. Then they did a newscast, and David realized, this is not my way. This is not what I'm here for, and this is not what I call my way. And he left the group. So I argue vehemently that David was never really even a part of the Yamakasi, which is I said earlier. Last you say, when did they join? How influential were the other people to the scene? Again, I don't know when people joined, when people officially joined. Maybe someone trained one time, then left for 6 months, and then came back and were official after that for 6 months. When did they join? I don't even know the answer to that question. If you told me the exact dates, we may not be able to define a good answer. I think a lot of people came and went. I think Sebastien was no doubt the closest friend of David, so he had the most influence on David's development as a friend. And from there, David took inspiration from his father and from movement, like we all do. So we can go on and on clearly and discuss these ideas for hours and make conjecture and ideas. The people that are best suited to make those conjectures are people like Sebastien and David and some of those other guys like Chau or whoever. And that's why when I boil it down, I'd like to just make it simple and say, what was David's path? That was parkour. What is freerunning now? That's Sebastien's path. Let's follow that. What's ADD? That's their path. Everything else just kind of just group training and fun. But I think those guys really were on to something, and that's why they are where they are today. Last few little things. Oh yeah, so this is super important. How much time am I talking for? Maybe like half an hour now? A few more things. George Hebert has nothing to do with parkour, has zero to do with parkour. Like, erase him from your mind and memory as having anything to do with parkour. Zero, zilch, nothing. People try to say, oh yeah, parkour started with George Hebert. Parkour Generation says this. People that try to get all uppity and pretentious about the history of parkour, like they know a lot of stuff, bring in George Hebert's name. He has zero to do with parkour. Absolutely nothing. Here's the story. Raymond, David's father, was abducted into the Children's Army in Vietnam back in, I don't know what year. That's when he started his method. That's when he was put in a very adverse situation where he had to grow up really quickly. And by the age of 13, I believe he was like the commander or general of another troop of his own troop of infantry children fighters. And this is where they'd go through the forest and where he'd rub his arms and hit his arms on trees to make his, bark of trees to make his forearms strong. And he would do the parkours of being really quiet or going through the trees and things like that. This is where Raymond started his path. This is where he became strong. Later in life, he moved to France and became a firefighter. And then some of the training, as far as I know, in that time in his life was from George Hebert. But that has nothing to do with parkour. You have Raymond training his way, finding his way, doing parkours, and then as an adult, he starts to have these other methods of the natural method of physical culture by George Hebert that's influential in his firefighter training. But that has nothing to do with it. If anything, it's theoretically possible that Raymond could have taken some small inspiration from that, in the same way that we all take inspiration from everything that we experience in life. But to say that has anything to do with parkour is even a part of parkour's history is completely ridiculous. Because Raymond started before that, long before that, doing his path with his need to survive in a war as a child. That's where he became strong. That's where he found his way. And when he says to David, I did parkours, that's how I became strong, it has nothing to do with this training he did for the firefighters or whatever, or for the French military or whatever he was involved in. It has everything to do with his method as he found it. Right? Does that make sense? So we can just stricken George Hebert and that whole history. It's ridiculous. It's what you bring in when you want to try to bring in ADD and all those things together in one solid concept. That's where that comes from, and it's ridiculous. You said that Chau said he did his first Yamakasi jump at 9 years old. Okay, maybe he did. Maybe he went off and jumped off of a roof at 9 years old. That means nothing. It means zero. All right. It means zero to the development of parkour. All it says is Chau has this memory of being 9 years old, being a little kid in 4th grade, doing some crazy jump. David's 4 years older, and David says he started parkour at 13. Maybe the first day they went out jumping, maybe they jumped off a roof together because they were cousins. Maybe David goes to his father's tent, talks to his father. Raymond says, yeah, I did parkours. And he goes, oh, cool. And then he goes to his little cousin, hey, let's go do parkours, and they go jump off a roof. Maybe that's what happened. I don't know, right? But I know that has zero to do with parkour developed by David from Raymond. So, hope that makes sense. Any last things? Yeah, these issues are all confusing, and the right person to answer it is Sebastien. He's the person to answer these questions. About everything else. About parkour, the answers are very simple. David wrote a book called Parkour. Go get the book, it's in French. And read it. And that'll tell you what parkour is and where it came from. That's what you need to know about parkour. Everything else, all the group training, all those ideas, the free running, that's a different history and a different story and a different offshoot. And that's why I default to Sebastien, because he was kind of in the midst of that, really close to David, but also friends at the time with everybody else. I think he has the objectivity to speak into that and clear these things up once and for all. But for me, the important matters are cleared up. And the important matters is, this is parkour. What is parkour? It's from David, inspired by his father Raymond, and that's what really matters. Last two things. Like I think Bruce Lee said it, like if the definitions bother you, forget the definitions. Which you said, Paul, that a lot of people are saying now, like, oh, let's not talk about it. But I agree with you, like, let's talk about it. What are the definitions? Let's figure it out. And then we can forget about it, because everything's set in place. But that said, what I spent before I moved to France and worked with David is I was always caught up in the details of parkour. I was always caught up in the techniques, in the concepts. It was like intellectually delving into the discipline. And by going so deep into the minutia of details, I, in my pride, thought I was understanding things better, but it was just the opposite. I was missing the whole point. So we have to be very careful about that conundrum of if it bothers you, forget it, but at the same time being cognizant of how things were, what the facts are. So you kind of have to find that for yourself. And lastly, a lesson that I tell people, because David said this in one of his posts back when I was working with him, I was there when he said it, I translated it for him and put it online, was about what's important is that you find a teacher that helps you. Parkour is legitimate discipline. The Fukan Freerunning Academy is legitimate training place. Whatever Chau does for ADD, whatever he thinks he's doing, that's legitimate as well. It's not important that one is better than the other. Now, I think parkour is 50 times better than all those other ones, you know. But that's not important. What's important is what resonates with you as an individual. Right? Everyone finds their liberty in different ways in life. Everyone finds their freedom or their creativity. Parkour is one door to find that. Some people find it through martial arts. Some people find it through painting. Some people find it through acting. Some people find it through math. You can find it through fixing cars. You can find that liberty and that freedom and that growth as an individual in whatever you do. And parkour is just one of those ways. And it's a discipline that finds it for the people that like to move, that like to train in the way that David liked to train. So in that regard, that's another thing that I say, that some of these details aren't important. Because what's important is that you follow the person that resonates with you. If Chau resonates with you and you think his teachings are great and you want to be like him, then go and learn from him. And that's all you need. Right? You can forget David. Who gives a crap about David? Go train with Chau. Right? Chau doesn't resonate. I give a crap. I don't want to talk to Chau. I don't want to train with him. I don't want to hear anything he has to say. I don't care about that. Right? For me, I care about David. That's why I went after David and moved to France and worked with him, because that's what resonated with me. And you have to find what resonates with you. And that's what's important. As far as writing a paper about it or a history, well, I hope I've given you some insight and some ideas to help clear up what you thought about it. But maybe I didn't. Maybe I just made things more complicated. Anyway, like I said, I see parkour as David's, freerunning as Sebastian's, ADD as those other guys, and anything in between is kind of just a bunch of talk. So, hope that makes sense. Paul, I love hearing from you. If you have more specific questions next time, I'd be happy to give you a shorter video. But as it is, you get this one. So I hope you found it enlightening, and wishing you great training, great progression with your projects in Ireland. All right. Yo, man, take care.